Welcome back, everyone. Today we pause to honor some of the American stars we have recently said goodbye to, along with other cherished figures whose presence left a mark on the world. If this means something to you, a like goes a long way. It helps us keep making these tributes with the attention and sincerity they deserve. We're glad you're here. Let's take this moment together. Dena Freeman left us at 66. For those who grew up watching television in a certain era, that name carries a quiet kind of warmth. A familiar face in a familiar room. You weren't always watching for her specifically, but the moment she appeared, something clicked. The news came without fanfare, no big announcement, just a quiet confirmation that spread slowly and stayed. Those who watched TV in the early 80s likely remember her as April on Too Close for Comfort. The show had a comfortable, unhurried energy. Ted Knight was the anchor of the whole thing, the kind of performer who gave a room its shape. And she fit right into that world without effort, as though she had always been part of it before anyone thought to film it. Some faces don't need constant exposure to stick. They just show up at the right time in your life and stay there. Her career extended well beyond that role. Commercials, guest spots, steady television work that rarely made the front page. But that was the reality for a lot of performers from that period. They built careers through reliability and craft, quietly, without the noise. Those who knew her on set talked about the kind of warmth that wasn't performed. She remembered people. She lingered after scenes. She was present in a way that didn't require an audience. And now she's gone, another thread from that television generation quietly pulled. It makes you think about all those ordinary evenings spent watching those shows, moments that felt routine at the time and only later revealed themselves to be something you'd carry with you. Bo Lueders was 39 when he passed. For anyone who came up around heavier music, the kind that hits you somewhere below thought, that loss lands hard. Word spread through the Hardler podcast, the community he helped shape alongside Colin Young. It didn't feel like a press release. It felt like something being said quietly in a room full of people who already knew what it meant. He was a founding member of Harm's Way. If you were anywhere close to the hardcore scene in the late 2000s and into the early 2010s, that means something. Those weren't arena shows with polished productions. They were small rooms, bodies packed together, music that felt urgent and physical. Bo was part of what made that world real, not just a participant but someone who helped give it its shape. As time went on, he moved into a different kind of role with Hardler, stepping back from the stage and into conversation. He talked about the scene with the ease of someone who had actually lived it, no posturing, no distance. Just memory and honesty. Communities like that one tend to hold grief differently. They don't always broadcast it loudly. But you feel it in the quiet that follows. 39 doesn't make sense in the way some deaths eventually do. There's no resolution to it. Just the feeling that something was still unfolding, still being built, and now it won't be. For everyone who was there from the beginning, from those packed basements to the long conversations about records and history, this is the kind of loss that reminds you how fragile all of it is. James Edward Gadsden passed at 86. And there's a good chance you spent decades listening to him without ever once knowing his name. His sound was everywhere. The confirmation came from those closest to him, handled with the quiet dignity the moment called for. He emerged in the late 1960s, arriving at exactly the moment when rhythm and blues was deepening and expanding into something harder to define. He didn't push for the spotlight. He found his place inside the music itself, settling into grooves so natural and steady that you almost forgot they were built by a person until you noticed that without them, nothing else would hold. For anyone who really experienced the 1970s, James Gadsden was the pulse beneath some of the most enduring songs ever recorded. Bill Withers, Marvin Gaye, music that moved slowly and meant it. There's a quality to his playing that musicians still talk about. The ability to hold back just enough to give a song room to breathe. That kind of restraint is earned, not learned. He wasn't simply contributing to recordings. He was part of their emotional architecture. And from everything people say, he carried that same unhurried presence off the stage as well. No need to fill the room. Just someone who understood the value of the right moment. 86 years is a full life, and yet when the rhythm has always been there, you don't quite realize how much you relied on it until it stops. There is a photograph of him. He is not yet anyone the world would recognize. Just a young man standing on a New York street sometime in the early 1960s. His coat is too light for the weather. His hands are in his pockets. And there is something in his expression that suggests he already knows something the rest of the world hasn't caught up to yet. Not confidence exactly. Something more private than that. He was born Robert Zimmerman in 1941, in Duluth, Minnesota. A place where winters are long and ambitions tend to stay quiet. People there live their lives without much ceremony. But he was restless in that life almost from the beginning. Before any of it happened, before the name and the records and the mythology, there were just radios and late nights and voices coming in from far away, blues stations broadcasting something that felt more real than his surroundings. He absorbed it all. And when he finally made his way to New York in 1961, it wasn't exactly a plan that brought him there. It was more like gravity. Greenwich Village in those years was electric. Coffee houses, small stages, audiences leaning forward. He stepped into that world unpolished and uncertain and completely present. The songs he started playing didn't follow the usual rules. The lyrics unsettled people in ways they couldn't immediately explain. Attention came slowly, and then all at once. When the freewheelin' Bob Dylan arrived in 1963, something changed in the atmosphere. Blowing in the Wind wasn't a protest song so much as a question, asked quietly, aimed at a silence nobody wanted to name. He didn't offer answers. That was always the point. He never held still long enough for anyone to fully claim him. Even at the height of it, he was already somewhere else. 1965, Newport Folk Festival. The crowd arrived expecting the familiar. Acoustic guitar, honest simplicity, the version of him they had agreed upon. Instead he walked out with an electric guitar and changed the temperature of the room in an instant. Accounts differ on exactly how the crowd responded. But the feeling in that space was undeniable. He was not simply adjusting his sound. He was stepping out of the image people had built around him, and that is something audiences rarely forgive without a fight. Like a rolling stone had already lit the fuse. 6 minutes long, commercially impractical, industry resistant. He released it anyway. Tour nights grew hostile. The famous Shout of Judas from a Manchester crowd in 1966 became its own kind of legend. He didn't defend himself. He turned to the band and played harder. But beneath all the confrontation, something was wearing thin. Fame had never sat comfortably on him. It pressed. And then came the motorcycle accident in 1966. The specifics were always hazy, but the aftermath was clear enough. He withdrew. Not entirely, but meaningfully. Stepped back from the machinery, from the expectation, from the persona that had grown too large for any one person to inhabit. That kind of retreat is rarely just about exhaustion. Sometimes it's the only way to keep from disappearing entirely. He didn't return as anyone expected. By the mid-1970s there was a shift that people could sense but struggled to explain. Blood on the Tracks came out in 1975 and felt less like an album and more like overhearing something. Something raw and unresolved, not designed for consumption. Rumors circled around it, about his marriage, about fractures forming behind closed doors. He said nothing. Denied nothing. That gap between the spoken and the felt was always where he lived. And then, just as people began to settle into an understanding of who he was, he moved again. The late 1970s brought a full turn toward gospel. Not a subtle shift in tone but a complete reorientation. Concerts were different. His bearing was different. Some of his audience felt left behind. Others felt they were witnessing something genuinely unguarded. He made no effort to manage either reaction. Looking back at that period now, it reads less like conviction and more like seeking. Holding on to something and hoping it holds back. Transformation that real usually comes from somewhere unsteady. Decades accumulated. Records came and were received in every possible way. He kept moving regardless. And somewhere along the way, the question of who he really was stopped feeling urgent. People let go of the need to have an answer. When the Nobel Prize arrived in 2016, it almost seemed beside the point. Not undeserved, just oddly timed for a man who had never seemed to need the world's confirmation. He delayed his acknowledgement. Let the moment sit without rushing toward it. That alone said more than most acceptance speeches ever could. Now he is in his 80s, still touring, still moving between cities as though settling somewhere has never quite been an option. Not even within his own story. The voice has changed. That's just time. But there is something in how he stands on stage now, something settled and undemanding, like he is no longer reaching for anyone in particular. Just present. And perhaps that is the nearest he has ever come to being truly understood. Not in the loud years, not in the provocative ones, but now, in the silences between songs, in the refusal to explain, in the simple fact that after everything, he is still here. Still unfinished. Still becoming.